Good evening. My name is Julia Barrett, and I am in the International Arts and Culture cohort of the Women's Leadership Program. And for tonight's symposium, we will be honoring women leaders from many of the top museums in our country. We are excited to be presenting this panel as one of the first events for the new GW Museum. And we are especially thankful to Director John Wettenhall and his entire staff for their gracious welcome to this amazing space. Before we begin, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator, Susan Ahrensberg. Throughout her career, Susan has curated many famous exhibitions, served as the executive producer for several documentary films, and has supervised the production of about 30 different award-winning films, and has taught art courses at Georgetown University. Currently, Susan is the head of the Department of Exhibition Programs at the National Gallery of Art here in Washington, D.C. And needless to say, we are very lucky to have her with us here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Susan Ahrensberg.
Well, thank you, Shelley. Is this working? Yes? And thank you, Julia. And also, thank you very much to Shelley Heller for inviting all of us here to participate in this panel, which I think for any of you who may be considering careers in museums will offer a wonderful opportunity to hear a variety of viewpoints from women who represent an impressive array of museums of different types. So I would like to, this is Camille Akiju of the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum, and Carrie Rabora Barrett of the Metropolitan Museum. And we have Kathy Provost of the Newseum, and Patrice Legros, sorry, you were hidden there, of the Marianne Koshland Science Museum, and Wilma Vaught of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial, and Jan Seidler Ramirez of the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. So in a minute, we will hear a bit from each of these women about the path they took to their present positions. But before we get to that, I would like to ask each of them simply to introduce themselves and to describe the positions they currently hold, their principal roles and responsibilities. So perhaps we could begin with Camille.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased to look out on this audience and see all these future leaders in there. So just to tell you a little bit about the Anacostia Community Museum, we are the smallest museum in the Smithsonian framework, but not that I'm biased or anything. I think we do some of the most exciting work of all of the Smithsonian museums. We are the only museum that actually grounds the Smithsonian to Washington, D.C. It is the D.C. Museum. And we focus on issues that impact urban communities. We're 47 years old. For the first 40 years of the museum, we focused on collecting African American history and culture from east of the river communities. And then in 2003, when Congress approved the building of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, we had to sort of retool and redesign our future based on being relevant to the community and sustainable within the Smithsonian. So I am the chief cook and bottle washer. I have a staff of 17, which is very small. We have a 25,000 square foot exhibition area. We have a program room. We're sort of victims of our own success. We have a program room where we hold our public programs. It's fire coded for 80 people, and routinely 120, 180 people will show up. So we're facing growing pains, but we do wonderful things. Please go to our website, anacostia.si.edu, and take a look at some of the things that we're doing.
Hi, I'm Carrie Barrett. I want your job, chief cook, bottle washer, and fire marshal, right? So I'm the deputy director at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, much, much bigger than the Anacostia, a little bit bigger, largest museum in America with comprehensive collections. No, hard to say. We try to be modest. We say the most comprehensive collection. But it is, it's an encyclopedic museum. It goes all the way from ancient times. We have 3 archaeological departments, all the way through modern and contemporary. 17 curatorial departments, 5 conservation, education, library, a digital media department that I'd love to talk to you about that I created 4 years ago that conglomerated websites, social media, gallery interactives into one department, which was previously happening, kind of popping up all over the museum, which it's a longer story, but what have I forgotten? Photo studio, editorial, we're our own publisher too. The role of deputy director is sort of everything that I described. I'm not the chief cook and bottle washer. I would say behind every great man, there's a woman doing a lot of the work. So I meet with all of the department heads from those areas. It's 27 departments that report to Tom Campbell, our director, who is amazing and wonderful. I wasn't making fun. Amazing and wonderful, and a good friend. We were both curators before he became director, and then he brought me up a year later as deputy director, and that means a lot at a place like the Met, where at least 2 people in the senior leadership actually came from curatorial ranks. So I can tell you more about my background later, but it's my work is a lot of administration, a lot of management. I'm learning. I've been in this job now for 5 years, and I would say one of the key things that I've learned is the difference between management and leadership. Really trying to define what that is. To help people get a yes is what I do on a day-by-day basis, to really advocate for the good work that's done, and try to keep it within a budget. So it's really good work. It's really interesting work, and I'm just delighted if I can inspire any of you to go into museum work tonight. One out of the crowd. It's just one of the greatest careers ever. It's not stress-free, but it's just wonderful. You fall asleep every night thinking every one of my problems is about richness and abundance and beauty and people, right?
Hello, I'm Patrice Legros. I'm the chief cook and bottle washer at a startup museum. We're only 10 years old, and we're only 5,000 square feet, and I only have 4 staff. Yeah, and our fire code allows us 150 people, but that's standing for a reception. But I work for an old organization. The National Academy of Sciences was chartered by Lincoln back in 1863. He needed a source of independent advice during the Civil War. And so he created the National Academy of Sciences. And believe me, it is a place full of men. We have made some progress with getting women into science, but the old stalwarts, our leadership, primarily male, very nice guys, but we're pushing, to have a more diverse group of leaders. My work is very creative, and I did my undergraduate work in art history, and I thought, the last thing I want to do is go into a museum. I wanted to be out there and be an activist. And so, but actually, as it ended up through my international work, I came around to science as a way of solving problems both globally and locally. And I'm able to apply my creative skill and my problem-solving skill around engaging people like you and people your age and how to solve problems. And these are problems like climate change and others that won't be solved, anytime soon. But we have a pathway. And so that's what my museum does. It is the interface between a national, international organization and local. But some of the things that we do, actually, it's been very challenging because we're not a community organization, and the Academy of Sciences doesn't have a public face to speak of. But I do get my curators, I get to draw from all over the world, and they work for me for free. Yeah, it's really quite amazing. So I'm able to get the best experts, whether it's in climate science or the spread of infectious diseases, whatever the problem is, I can reach out and they can help me. So I feel that my position has helped me bring together a wide diversity of interest, and I'm like so grateful to be able to do it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Trost. I'm head of exhibits and public programs at the Newseum. And first of all, I'd like to ask how many people have been to the Newseum. Oh, good. So you know what it is. Around the shop, we sometimes call it the I had no idea Newseum, because a lot of people don't really realize before they get in the door how extraordinary it is inside, and I hope some of you who've been there felt that. I think people think it's going to be about dying newspapers and cable news, right? And when you get inside, it's really this extraordinary experience, very interactive, very experiential, where the great stories of your lives and your parents' lives and your grandfather's lives, the greatest stories of history, are explored through the stories of the news reporters who were actually there. Because news is the first rough draft of history, right? Before it was history, it was news. And so we're great storytellers, we hope, and that's what we try to convey through the museum. We also feel like we're sort of like where history meets breaking news. We transform ourselves every single day. If you've seen the front pages on Pennsylvania Avenue, they're literally those days' front pages. And we have news feeds coming in every day all over the building. And we're also probably, I'm not bragging about this because it's a lot of work, the fastest museum in town, because we have a lot of journalistic DNA. I'm a recovering journalist, so I have the least traditional career path, I'm sure, here for a museum job. But I think it brings a huge vitality to the museum experience to tell stories in a journalistic way and to be able to respond fast. We can be like after Charlie Hebdo, we were up with exhibit photos and signage and programs that day. So that's how quickly we can respond to breaking news. But we also have a great respect for 500 years of news history. And I'll leave it at that. Yes, I think so.
Well, I'm retired Brigadier General Wilma Vaught. And my career of 28 and a half years was spent in the Air Force. And I had retired and was living here in Washington. And in 1987, I was asked to be on the board of directors of the Women's Memorial Foundation to build a memorial honoring all the women who've ever served, beginning with the American Revolution. And I had never had anything to do with fundraising, building buildings, collecting collection items, anything of that type. So I started from zero. And it's been, I am now in my 29th year as president of the Women's Memorial. And to tell you how things work out, 29 years ago in March, I was sitting in my house and I got a phone call from another person on the board, and she said, "Why weren't you at the meeting?" And I said, "What meeting?" And she said, "Of that board we're on." I said, "I forgot about it. What did you do?" And she said, "We elected officers. You're the new president." And little did I know that I had just changed my life. So I was the person responsible for picking a site, which is the main gate at Arlington National Cemetery. It is not a part of the cemetery. It's a part of the National Park Service. And then I was responsible for getting a design. We had committees that did that. We built behind the wall that's there. We built an education center, which has, I'm a little bit bigger than the lady down there. We're about 36,000 square feet, but most of that is not exhibit space. We have 16 niches in the wall where we have exhibits. So there are those people who refer to this as the National Women's Museum. It is not. It's truly a memorial. And our exhibits cover the American Revolution through the Iran-Iraq conflicts. So I am responsible for the fundraising for the some 40 people who work for us in the memorial and for the foundation. Our primary mission is to pay tribute to the women who served in the military, give them pride in their service, We have visitors who come from all over. When you think about the number of women who served, it's almost 3 million, and we have only found about 257,000 of those to get them registered. So we have a lot of work yet to do. So I know a lot more about this whole operation than I did 29 years ago when I started. Thank you.
See if I can do this. So I'm Jan Ramirez. I'm the Vice President of Collections, the Chief Curator at the 9/11 Museum, which is sort of the newest planet in this constellation. The 9/11 Museum was dedicated last May. We've had over 2 million visitors to date, which is astonishing. It's a new planet, so the gases are, the ground is still not quite solid. We're figuring out what does it mean to have 2 million people coming through this space. And the space itself is exceptionally unusual and emotional, as some of you know if you've visited. Our roof is the outdoor memorial honoring the 2,983 people who were killed on 9/11. The museum occupies the archaeological void of 8 of the 16 acres that had been the World Trade Center. And it has the dual mission, which is much more challenging than I think any of us thought, of being both a memorial that pays tribute to the dead and a history museum that educates about a history that's unfinished and is changing in some ways every day. It has the additional kind of valence of an inheritance that we must honor the skeletal relics of the World Trade Center site and make them meaningfully accessible to the public. So one of my first artifacts is a 60-foot-long oozing slurry wall, which I can assure you drives our conservator crazy because it's throwing out humidity every day in places we don't want it to be. And also the relocation into the heart of the museum of the repository of unidentified and unclaimed human remains. So the very fact that's present in the museum, people will not see it. We don't operate it. It's behind a wall. But that is a real check and balance on just how deeply we can dive into part of our mission. So I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Well, since I think now it would be interesting, now that we've heard what your current positions are, to find out from each of you the path you took to get there, the decisions you made along the way, how you prepared yourself, sometimes inadvertently perhaps, sometimes it's accidental how things happen, but they all, one learns in different ways. And I thought maybe we would start with you, Jan, and work back this way.
So my story is a little dull because I've been doing this all of my career, and I wouldn't do anything else. Like Carrie, I absolutely get up every morning, and I really cannot believe I'm doing what I love to do. When I got out of college, I was an American Studies major in college, so I was very interested in American culture, and this was just at the dawn of the study beginning to come into the university of what was called material culture studies. Objects were as relevant as texts, as the written word or the picture. And I went to graduate school at a program at Boston University in American Studies, but as part of the degree granting process, we had to do what was called a practicum in a museum. And I was supposed to go to something called the Merrimack Valley Textile Museum. I mean, what I know about textiles doesn't even fit on the head of a pin, and there's so little. And there was a fire there about a week before. They called me with the bad news that they couldn't take me on as an intern. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting, considering it's a degree requirement. And about 4 minutes later, the phone rang, and it was the Decorative Arts Department at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts saying, we're doing a show and we need somebody to come in who kind of knows something a little bit about history, because it's about Paul Revere and the world of Paul Revere. So I went. It's totally the right place at the right time, because the American Revolution bicentennial was the fervent and the winds. But I have never looked back. I have great faith in the power of objects to move people, both as beautiful things unto themselves, but, as bystanders of history, eyewitnesses to history, survivors of history, that kind of DNA of history. And having been at an art museum for maybe 7 or 8 years, I then shifted into art and history at a place called the Hudson River Museum, which led to a job at the Museum of the City of New York, which was just wonderful for about 13 years as the chief curator there. And then I moved over to the New York Historical Society, which is the, next to the Massachusetts Historical Society, is I think the second oldest collecting institution in the nation. And it has an incredible collection of, American art and sort of the curiosity of New York over 3 to 4 centuries, phenomenal archive. And I happened to be newly there when 9/11 happened. And what we decided to do, as everyone was kind of wanting to buy dog biscuits and send warm socks down to the rescue workers and donate blood and, try to do what they could do, is we decided, well, maybe what we could do is be curators and be conservators and be archivists and librarians and think about what we could be doing to preserve what felt very transformative. But we had no idea where this was going. And so the kind of creaky 200-year boat got turned into the storm, and we ended up doing a program there for about 5 years called History Responds, which had a collecting component, major exhibition component, public program component. And then when the opportunity came to sort of be part of this brand new project in Lower Manhattan, I thought, I've got to try this. I've never worked for literally from the ground up. Literally, we're talking about 70 feet below ground as the ground up, and so it's been absolutely amazing. It has every day has been a political torture in this project, so that has been its own issue. But we've become very savvy about what we call flashpoints. Who our stakeholders are, how our words can get misinterpreted. So happy to talk about that a little bit later.
I might just caution people, since I know we want a question and answer period. So maybe we should keep each response to about 5 minutes or 4 minutes, and I'll give a little signal if it's running long, because we do want to have time for all of your questions. I hear none of you are shy, so we should expect a lot of them. But thank you very much, Jan. It's very interesting. Wilma, perhaps you could tell us about your path?
Well, I did graduate from college with a degree in business, and I served in that area when I was in the Air Force. And I was very fortunate in that I spent 4 years in what was then Air Force Systems Command, so I got involved with some contracting, watched how things got done, which proved invaluable to me as I got started trying to go through this process of everything I had to do, including being in charge of the building of the education center or the memorial itself. And it was just, it was a learning process. Just as things happened, I learned what I had to do about it. And for example, after we had announced that we had a site and that we had a design, I don't think it was very long after that we started receiving these boxes of memorabilia that people, families, members of someone who had died were sending them to me. And, we'd open these up with great interest. And now we have about 4,000 square feet of these things that people have sent us, uniforms, all kinds of memorabilia from their service time. But it's just been a thing of learning as I went and talking to people who were doing similar type things and learning from them. And if it proves anything, it proves don't be afraid to take on something that you've never done before in your life. And I can tell you that the most difficult part of the whole process was fundraising, because it doesn't make any difference how great an idea you have, how wonderful a site, how beautiful a design. If you can't get the money, it isn't going to happen. And then once you get it done, it's keep it going with money. And so that's where I spend a good share of my time, is trying to get money. See, I'll be coming around taking up a collection.
Okay, so I have a really checkered path. And my big takeaway is you can constantly reinvent yourself. You don't have to do the same thing the same way your whole life. I'm living proof. I was a reporter for about 25 years, a journalist. I loved being a reporter. I wish you could still be a reporter in the way I used to be able to be. I worked the night shift for UPI in San Francisco. I worked midnights. I covered cops in Detroit. You know, I had every experience. I traveled the world for the Detroit Free Press. I worked here in D.C. for the Wall Street Journal for 10 years, covering everything from politics to work and family issues. When I had my first kid, I said, hey, Wall Street Journal, let's wake up to the fact that there's women in the workforce. And we began to write about that very seriously. She's now 27, so that was a few years ago. But the transition to museums was not as hard as I thought, because it's all about storytelling, isn't it, ultimately? And so when the museum there was a little museum over in Virginia. I don't know if any of you remember it. It closed in 2002. It went dark, and they started planning this 6-year process to bring it over to Pennsylvania Avenue. And at that point, I came over just to write, really, to write exhibits. I'd never done it before, and it was incredibly fun. And I'll just tell you my epiphany moment, which was when I was sitting there one day working on some exhibit or something, but I realized that the real point of the museum was to really help people understand this incredible gift we have in America called the First Amendment, the 5 freedoms that we have: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition, and how important they are to us and to our democracy, and what an important role the press plays in that. And that really cemented my resolve to stay in this business, and it's one of the best and most fun things I've ever done. So that's how I got here.
And I really love how that's written on the front of your building, because I drive by it every day and I find it very inspiring. And so I mentioned to you that I started my undergraduate work in art history, and I wanted to work in the international field, and that's what drove me. And after dabbling in a few things, I did land a job at the National Academy of Sciences running scholarly programs with China, and then ran policy programs with Europe. And I got to travel. I got my chance. And what I realized, though, with all that international travel and working particularly with multilateral organization, that it was a lot of talk and not very much walk. And I really wanted the action. I wanted to be, I really wanted to see how we could make things better. And although, I've been in the academy now almost 30 years, I've kept moving up and moving around. And so after I did the international work, I was able to run a very large project to reform science education in the country, which was very political. And I got a reputation for being able to negotiate and manage the strife. So after that, I recognized that, here's this great national organization, but they have no way to interact with people on an ongoing basis. They didn't have, they make good stuff, but then they don't, they go on to making other good stuff, so there was not the kind of continuity that I felt one needed to help communities learn science or do improvements, whatever. So I did a period of time in science education, did some things on teaching evolution, which was, again, controversial. But I was a young program officer, and the president of the academy at the time called me up and said, hey, I'm just about to release this report on evolution. I had all these great reporters there ready to talk about it. And he says, I need a proposal tomorrow for a science museum. So essentially, after the release of the report, I had 4 hours to write a $30 million proposal, which got funded the very next Monday. So I was, over time, this little entity, this startup, has been a great playground. I've raised about $41 million for it. But it sounds like a lot, but it's an endowment, so don't be impressed. I still struggle, and that's why I have such a small staff. But I did graduate work in international political economics, so I got a grounding in that area. But I much more prefer this creative space that this startup, digital, non-artifact storefront does, because it really gives me a lot of room to play. And one of the most exciting things I get to do is bring great brains together with great creativity, and I kind of negotiate between them. And it's a very culturally challenging thing to do, to bring all that knowledge into a great story. We're still learning how to do it, so I need to take some lessons from her.
I'm thinking as I'm listening what I can possibly tell you from my life that would be meaningful. I'm actually more interested in your lives. I really am. Not that mine is done by any means, but I just think the story of, I think some of you are out there thinking, how do I get a job like these women have? What do I need to do? What kind of degree do I have? I graduate from college. What do I do next? What should be on my resume? There are all these kind of skill building that you need. And I'm a little like Jan. It's just not that interesting. I had a mother who took me out, grew up in Chicago. My mom used to take me out of school to go to the Art Institute of Chicago with my 2 brothers and my sister, because she decided that was more interesting than school. We hated museums. We hated those days. We wanted to be with our friends. It was like in 4th grade. What do you mean, another day at the Art Institute? But we laugh now. My mother's one of my best friends, and we laugh now about what, fast forward to what that meant to me. And what that meant to me was a real a comfort with culture. I would say for all of you out there, you have myriad choices without even knowing what your degrees are or where your sites are. I would say the arts is not a multi-million-dollar profession unless maybe you're going to go into art dealing. It's something that I would say the common denominator for people with whom I work now at the Met is a little bit like what I said before. We just love what we do. And because there's like a few men in the back, you can do this too, but I think I work with a lot of women. There are many, many, many women in leadership positions at the Met and in leadership in general. And I think if I had to kind of pinpoint what it is that we bring to our job is backgrounds and education and just working your butt off, I have to say. Just it isn't enough to be in the right place at the right time, which I think I sort of always was, like just lucky. Got a fellowship and somebody left, got a job and then got promoted. But you just have to keep working really, really hard at what you're doing, and things will come your way. And the other, to come back to what I think women can bring to a job that men can too, but I think women do. It's I think it's compassion. I just have to say, I think it's a real compassion for other people and what you do. In my work now, as an administrator, but I think I was doing it as a curator too 5 years ago. I'll tell you the most important thing I do every single day, which feels almost like giving it up, is delegate. It's getting somebody else to do it. Not because I don't want to do it, but because it gets more done. And it's so much fun. And you think, oh my God, I don't want to give you that, it's so much work. But inevitably, so even in your classwork or what you're doing right now, the more that you can get groups of people to work on things together, the better off you're going to be. The more you can make somebody else into a leader and not worry about what it means for you. That was my idea. I was going to do that. Wait a minute, I'm not getting any credit. Who cares? Seriously, who cares? As long as the world changes and museums are great. And that's how, it's not just, I'm trying to do that. The great women I know in every walk of life are a little bit self-effacing. They're fun. They have a lot of gravitas. They're passionate about what they do. And they bring other people along. And that's really the way. That doesn't give you finite, like what am I going to do when I graduate from college? But I would say even now, just involve yourself with interesting people who are doing good things, responsible, trustworthy, honest, together kind of people. And your world will fall into place, I promise you.
Hi, I started out, I think in the third grade, my aunt asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I told her I wanted to own my own art school.
That's great.
Of course, I didn't know what that meant, but so I kind of have always been an artist. My mother swore that I drew pictures from the time I could hold a pencil, and I was almost myopic. It was a survival instinct for me. I was a middle child and with an older brother and a younger, cute little sister, and it was sort of the thing that gave me self-esteem. So I never lost track of that, actually. I majored in secondary art education in undergrad and then went into art history for my master's. And while I was in my master's program at Howard University, I got an internship at the Smithsonian at what was then the National Collection of Fine Arts. It's now the Museum of American Art, in the education department. And actually, that was my aha moment, because I had never actually considered how you could combine art education with museum work until I got this spot. And I was a printmaker, and they had a program called Discover Graphics, where they would load a brand press onto a panel truck, go into rural Virginia and Maryland, unload the press, teach these kids in one-room schoolhouses, and I'm old, but not that old. This was in the early 70s, and teach these kids how to do printmaking, and to watch their faces and love the fact that they had black ink all over their hands. It was just amazing. So it reinforced where I knew I was going. It just showed a new path through museums. But as luck had it, I ended up working in grassroots, not-for-profit, community-based arts organizations. So it took me years before I got into a museum setting. I worked at a very small organization in the Bronx called Mind Builders, which everybody thought was mine builders. They thought we were building mines. And progressed from there. It was a program that offered music, dance, and visual arts instruction for inner city children in out-of-school time settings. So it was after school, weekends, holidays. It was a small school. We had about 80 students altogether. Then I was offered a job at the Transit Museum. They had opened an exhibit, excuse me, for the bicentennial that was so well attended. Actually, their attendance figures for that 1 year outnumbered the Museum of Modern Art, because next to stamp collectors, philatelists, the next large group of fanatics are train buffs. And it was really very interesting. I was in the education department there, and it was very interesting because it helped me. It was still community-based. It was housed in Brooklyn. We attracted people from all over the world, but there were kids in Staten Island who had never been to Brooklyn. And there were kids in Manhattan who had never been to Brooklyn. So it was very transformative, and working with children is always, to me, transformative for adults. So I'm running out of time. Yeah. I got one more thing to tell, okay? So anyway, I was at the Harlem School of the Arts before I came to the Smithsonian. And I think the reason that the Smithsonian thought I would be the person for this particular job was because it was a community-based museum. It was their only community-based museum. And my experience with grassroots engagement was what they were looking for.
Thank you very much. Well, just quickly, I wanted to work in museums from quite a young age. I was introduced to the field of art history, a field that I had no idea even existed, in about the 10th grade. And I just thought that art was such a wonderfully captivating sort of keyhole through which to look at the past, through which to study the past. And unlike, say, straight political history, through art history, there are all sorts of issues that you have to familiarize yourself with in order to understand a work of art, that are social history, cultural history. What were the religious beliefs? What were the political beliefs? So I was hooked on that. So I majored in art history. I got my master's at the Institute of Fine Arts. I had a summer internship at the Met, which was wonderful. And after that summer ended, I continued at the Met as an assistant, mostly in the medieval department. And eventually got my doctorate. My field was medieval and Byzantine art, which made a lot of sense when I was in New York and Boston, but when I got to Washington, D.C., after I got married, it was clear that outside of Dumbarton Oaks, which has a wonderful but very small staff, there really were not a lot of opportunities. So while I was writing my dissertation, I had a fellowship at the National Gallery and it's called the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts, or rather grand title. But they give fellowships to pre-doctoral fellows, as well as who are mostly writing their dissertation, and to senior fellows who are taking a leave of absence to work on a book. And I think both the summer internship at the Met and the fellowship at the National Gallery were real gateways to what happened next. So I would really encourage any of you who have or may be contemplating museum work to go onto the website of museums that interest you and see what kind of internships they offer. Often there are a variety. They can be competitive, so you have to, look carefully at the requirements. I think the only other thing I would say is that I don't work in my field for the most part now. As a medievalist, as a Byzantinist in Washington, people were not beating a path to my door. So I accepted a job at the National Gallery, and now I work on all sorts of exhibitions of all periods, all cultures, Olmec, Mexico, ancient Afghanistan, Edo, Japan, all of which I have found fascinating, and perhaps more fascinating than if I had devoted myself exclusively to Byzantine art. So I just encourage you to be flexible. Even though I went to the trouble of getting a doctorate in medieval art, I don't feel that I don't use it. You may find if you go on in graduate school that you don't actually end up using the degree in the way that you anticipated you would. But one thing about writing a dissertation is that once you study one subject really deeply, once you go really to the bottom of something, it changes forever how you deal with any question. It makes you more critical, it makes you a faster researcher, it just makes you really wiser about how you approach any problem, and you have a clear understanding of what kinds of questions can be properly asked of that particular, that material or that subject. So I'll end there, but I do want to get to you. So what I'm going to do, I have a number of questions, but I think I will table those. And instead, just ask each of the panelists to very quickly, just 1 minute at most, to say what qualities, since we are at the Women's Leadership Program, I have to ask this. So what qualities do you think are most important in a leader? How do you define leadership, but quickly?
I would say that leadership is being the person that facilitates the genius around you, because you only look as good as the people around you. And also, I would say that leadership, one of the qualities you must have for leadership is integrity. Don't make false promises. Be as real with the people that you're seeking money from, supervising, your colleagues. You have to be very candid in what you want. You have to be very candid in how you can work collaboratively. Whenever you do a collaboration, you should clearly define who's doing what so that there's no confusion down the road. And really do what you say you're going to do. And that way you really, and that sets an example. Another thing that I think a leader does is, especially if you're entering a new environment, the first thing I do anyway is look around at the landscape and see who can be mentored to the next leadership position. You have to always think succession plan. So, because that's the way you foster new talent and encourage people to do good work.
Thank you. Carrie?
God, you did it all, Camille. I'm thinking, same thing I said before. I think delegation is important. I think trustworthiness is very, very important. I think the other thing, I'm trying to be additive here, I think the best leaders I know are flexible. They're excellent listeners. They're open to new ideas. So when I said earlier, when I introduced myself, I'd learned a lot about the difference between management and leadership. There's goal-oriented work, and I can manage a project all day long, and we could talk about that. But to be the leader of a project means get the best people in the room, figure out, like you said, what they're each doing, and then let them do their job. And don't micromanage. And that's what a leader does. But you're checking in enough to make sure that it actually, gets done. It doesn't mean leaving it alone and, going out somewhere. So, but that flexibility and the ability to change your mind, I think, is really, really important. A great leader can be persuaded by very, very smart staff that there's another way of doing it. And I think that's really key.
I'll additive also. Since I agree with everything that was said before, adaptability, willingness to take a leap, risk-taking, and being able to see further down the pike than the people around you.
Ditto to everything. Plus, build a talented team and get out of the way, which is essentially what you're saying. Set really high expectations, but tell them how awesome they are all the time, because people are worn down today by the amount of work that we're all expected to do and the expectations and the competition that you've all been through all your lives already, right? Just to get to where you are. So I can't underestimate how important it is to keep people feeling really appreciated.
I think one of the most important things you can do is don't lose your sense of humor. Sometimes things are absolutely so bad that if you don't have a sense of humor, you can't make it. Be yourself. Be confident. But don't be afraid to say you were wrong when you've made a mistake. And recover from it and say, hey, this is the way we've got to go. But if there's one thing, just don't lose your sense of humor.
Honestly, I mean, this has just been spectacular. I agree with everybody, all of my colleagues here. I would just also pick up on the theme of self-authenticity. As art historians and curators and museum directors, you are dealing and always asked to assess an authentic artwork, an authentic object, an authentic document, but you're authentic, and don't walk away from who you are. You're wonderful, and just remember that, and your staff will appreciate you for that, and your trustees will appreciate you, and your constituents will. So just hang in there.
The only thing I guess I would add is a good leader spots talent and hires well. And I think a goal should be to always try to hire someone who's smarter than you are. I think that signals confidence on the part of the leader and results in a more successful, stronger institution. So now let us hear from you. Julia, do you want to call on people, or how should we?
If you'd like, Just a quick announcement. The way that we're going to do questions is that when you have a question, you're going to come to the microphone in the center of the room so that they can all hear you clearly. So instead of just standing in your place, you're going to come to the microphone in the center of the room.
So, who wants to go first? Yes? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Why don't you go first? You go ahead, and then we'll do that second. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Olamide, and my question is, so we learned today about the importance of history and museums. So, you know how like here in America we have many museums. Teaching history is very important. So, what about different places that lack these opportunities to have museums where people don't know like their culture, and you know, like, history is very important. So, how important are museums, and why don't like, how does it like affect a place? You know, different countries, cities, even in America that don't have these museums to teach them about their history. So, just like you know, talk about that and how we can improve on that. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
I think that about 60% of what we do is offer guidance to communities, cities, countries that don't have museums, and we actually help them learn how to do that. Last year or the year before, I was in Equatorial Guinea, which they don't have a museum, a national museum. And we were invited to come over and take a look, and they're really interested in preserving their history. They have nothing, no technology, no building, no nothing. So one of the things that I suggested that they do is start in the villages, have the young people interview the old people, get it written down. Then you engage the young people with the older people to collect items. Then you teach them what the importance of these items are. I mean, we gave them a step-by-step how-to. And that's one thing that our museum does. We offer that service to the field. We produced a book, Religious Archives Manual, to show houses of worship how to archive their own materials, because most churches will save 500 copies of the 2001 Easter Sunday program when they don't need 500 copies. So we teach them, again, like I said, from A to Z, how to just put one foot in front of the other and help them determine what's important to them, and then help them achieve that.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Amira, and yes, I do have to tiptoe. I'm a bit on the shorter side, but that's okay. I'm in the Science, Health, and Medicine cohort, and I have two questions that are about balance, one directed to Kathy and one to Wilma. So the first is, there's a very fine line between exercising your freedom of speech and then misrepresentation of the facts or of stories, and I'm just curious, you know, because we live in a country that gives value to everyone's voice, how is that balance striked, or how, I mean, perhaps you could speak to some of the challenges of walking that fine line at the museum. And
No, that's a great question, and a great question for our own democracy as we tackle those sometimes not in the best ways these days, right, in our society. We have great freedom at the museum because the First Amendment is on the front of the building, to say this is a temple of free expression, and one person, you know, the speech that one person likes, another hates, but that is the First Amendment, and that is the grandeur of our democracy. How we handle it at the museum, you know, in terms of how we create and showcase free speech ideas, is that part of your question?
yeah, essentially, or how do you strike that balance? Because at the end of the day, you're limited by space, right? You can only, how do you pick which stories to put out there, essentially?
Great. Well,
balance
probably like
ideas.
everyone up here, that's a constant curatorial question, and one that we're planning out 3-year calendars on, and we're, personally speaking, at least for the museum, we're looking at a whole variety of issues, from topical, we're looking at news-related anniversaries, we're trying to get out ahead of national conversations on big important topics. We're opening an exhibit this year on looking back 50 years at reporting Vietnam. Those will be the kinds of things that we tackle. We may even take on a big exhibit like paparazzi, because of the First Amendment speech issues and press issues that are embedded in that, the rise of celebrity journalism and whether it's been good or bad for our culture. You know, so free speech can, I think the important part is to not, we have this funny thing we say, which is don't caramelize this, you know, caramelize the spinach. Don't make people eat their porridge when they walk into the First Amendment gallery, right? You can't just sort of shove this down people's throats. You have to put it into a really good story that they can understand and that they emotionally connect to, which so many of us at this table do, I am sure. They make these emotional connections and they walk away and they remember those important things about why freedom matters. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And I guess my second question, just very quick, I don't want to take too much time, but is directed towards Wilma. And my question is, when you were receiving all these boxes of memorabilia from women who had served in the U.S. Army, how did you, if you could just speak to the challenge perhaps of preserving the uniqueness of each woman's story, but still making it accessible, like in a way that a general population can learn from? Because we did a close reading of memoir at the beginning of the year, and I was just wondering this idea of taking a very specific story, but extracting value for a general population from it.
I think that's
I guess I could reshape. Yeah, it's a bit abstract, but basically, how do you address the challenge of taking a very personal story and making it accessible to a general population? Essentially, I think that's what a memorial is it not?
The personal story about a woman military that you're telling a story about at the memorial, how do you do that?
Well, if you went back in history, and you don't have to go back very far, there had been very little written about the history of women in the military. Very, very little at the time we started the memorial. So we have been busy building that history from the materials that we have gotten from women who have served, from researching what has been written in the past, and it's just an ongoing thing. We're not totally there yet, because if you read the history books about the conflicts, you're going to read about men. That's all. And the thing I find very fascinating about it is that, you know, right alongside those men who were serving in battle were those nurses who were females, and it never mentions them, never mentions them. And so we have got to fill in that story, and that's what we keep working at. We did a history that we published on the women who served in World War II, and we published a book about the women who served in the Korean War. But there's so much to be written.
Thank you.
You're next.
Okay. Hello, Melissa Lawrence, Science, Health, and Medicine cohort. And many of you women were trailblazers in your various fields. My question for, I guess, all of you are, what obstacles did you face throughout your careers? And how did you go about, I guess, addressing them, whether they be gender or race or people not thinking that you were necessarily qualified to do the jobs that you have now? Because before you, there were men doing these jobs. So how did you kick down the door and just be able to do what you do?
Well, I think the best protection against discrimination is strong qualifications so that you can never have your credentials challenged. It doesn't mean that that will always work, but I think it is the absolute best protection. And I think also once you're, have a job, it's very important to become part of the fabric of the institution where you are working. So don't have lunch at your desk every day, get out and form ties, meet people, figure out what they need, and then they know what you're doing, and you can find out ways to perhaps help each other. So I think if you face, these are ways to, if there is discrimination in the workplace, I think these are ways to protect yourself, to make yourself really integrated within the institution and have credentials that are as impeccable as you can make them.
Thank you.
I just want to add to that. I didn't have any difficulty getting the jobs that I got. It was once I was in those jobs that I started running into difficulties with having advisory boards or governing boards let me do my job. I always found myself having to convince them to let me try this. This is what you hired me for. But one thing was I always went into these positions saying, I don't work for you, I work with you, and you need to work with me. This is a partnership. And in terms of getting the job, I guess the reason why I never had difficulty getting a job, I never perceived any obstacles. Maybe I was just naive. I was always went in confident. And with that confidence comes the freedom of saying, well, if I don't get this one, there's another one out there for me. So that part never even bothered me.
Thank you.
Stronger. I would just add one thing about what you said, if I can offer. I'm also a mother of 2 daughters. That your obstacles aren't only going to come from men. Women are your biggest competition. So I'm not telling you that there isn't any. I'm not telling you that there isn't. But when you talk about gender or a guy had a job before, most often, at least in the field that we're in, it's going to be another woman who takes the job. So I would be very careful about always thinking that the other is a different gender or a different race. It's whoever is around you, and competition is such a good thing to make you strong. So the competition is what gets you up in the morning and makes you work harder. It really does. And so you're going to find that competition from older, younger, prettier, male, female, richer, poorer. It's going to be in every. It's hard to say, but when you really get out there and start looking for jobs, your competition is every color, every flavor, every age. Really is. And that's a good thing. Motivates you if you got the fire.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, all of us probably could tell you stories of what it was like to come up, but I think the more important thing is to say what we're saying here, which is what I would hope for my daughters. I have 2 daughters as well, and for all of you. Build a voice, get get interesting, use your voice. I can't believe how many people I work with who won't use their voice, who are like you, your age and your gender. I mean, talk, put out ideas even if they're not immediately accepted, like build a little bit of an internal shield to disappointment, and then get right back out there and kick back at them again. The people that I think are the best on our staff, they're just constantly having ideas. They're not flattened if they're not accepted. They're back thinking about it the next day. They're every day saying, what can I do? What's next? There's a huge excitement to it. And they just have this incredible sense of, I don't know what it is, this confidence in themselves, which I didn't necessarily have coming up. I'm a big mouth now, but I was not when I was your age. And if I could give any gift, it would be that you would have some sort of ability to just be able to use your voices and your incredible brains, but also work at it. Like everybody says here, read, learn, figure stuff out, and then talk about it.
Thank you.
Well, I was pretty lucky. I grew up, I was working in a different atmosphere in the military. And when you're in charge, you just expect people to do what they're supposed to do. And you give them that look, if you have to, that, you better be moving on and doing something because you've had the word.
Yeah.
And so that made it a lot easier for me. And I guess ever since, in the 29 years I've been with the other, it's sort of carried over. So I just kind of give people that look that, this is the direction we're going to go. And that's it.
Thank you.
I guess I would say that because you guys have had the benefit of a great education, show your joy of mastering something and master something and figure out a way to artfully weave it into many conversations because people, if you have a joy about what, a subject, a topic, an art form, it will be infectious to the right people, and know your stuff, is what I would say.
Thank you all so much.
Hi, I was wondering, what ways do all of you in your respective museums work to get people to care about the exhibitions? Because there are definitely people who often go to museums and are in sort of that art world, but there's a large amount of the population who also don't really know so much about that and may not know to go or know about the topics that are discussed in the museum. So I'm wondering, how do you get people to care and get people to go and engage with your community?
Twitter. We tweet. I think what Kathy was saying is really important. It's storytelling now. Storytelling. So the longer answer is marketing, 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 advertising, social media, getting the word out there. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you, we had a show last year. It's a little bit like it's what you're talking about. There has to be a story. We had a show last year that was called Assyria to Iberia, the Dawn of the Classical Age. And I'm an art historian, but even I said, where's Assyria? Is Iberia, I think that's part of Spain. And in the Dawn of the Classical Age, could any of you tell me what date that is? No, so the title was ridiculous. The story was esoteric. It was the most profoundly beautiful and important exhibition that we put on in 10 years. No other museum could have gotten it. But we completely missed the boat in terms of telling the story. We were walking through one night, and there was this woman with a yoga mat who said, "Oh my God, I get it. I get it. I get why India gave up Buddhism and became Hindu." And I thought, why aren't we telling that story? Like, she got it, but she had to leach it out of labels. And so more and more, I'm actually giving you an example of one we didn't do so well. But it's storytelling. And then I'll give you another simpler answer, is that even one of my favorite new things about the Met is that if you don't want to come and look at art, we hope that you'll come and sit in a courtyard. We hope that you'll come for coffee. We hope that you'll come and play games with your kids. So we're also becoming more and more open, a little bit less elitist. Our most popular thing is drinks on the balcony bar on Friday nights. There are people there, tomorrow there'll be people there. They may or may not look at art, but they leave saying, what an amazing place. I had so much fun there. And while I was walking out, I saw this show. I'm gonna go back. And so part of it is just finding people where they live instead of always saying, come to us, come to us, come to us, reaching out and saying, what do you want to do? We might have something that you like.
I also think that there's a tendency to overlook potential audiences. Diversifying your audience and not being condescending to any group of people. There's something in every exhibition for everyone. And you have to let people feel that they're not comfortable in coming into your environment. I think one of the things that works about our museum as opposed to maybe some of the other museums on the mall is that people walk in there and they feel like it's theirs, and we engage them that way. And the crowds that we attract for some of our programs, when you look into the audience and you see the diversity, you say, how did that happen? We have a program called Metro Mambo Series, which is a lecture demonstration about different genres of music, of Latin music. And it starts out with a lecture, and then it ends with a live band. And we get 3-year-olds dancing with 90-year-olds, and it's wonderful. And then there's all kinds of interpretive things and treasure hunts and things that they can go through the museum. So you just have to not assume anything you do is above anybody's level of understanding.
Could I just add, a great mix is really important, a great mix of concepts and ideas to meet people where they live, because we do really serious things at the museum that really connect people emotionally, like the 9/11 space, the Pulitzer Prize photographs, other big important stories. But you know what we did last year? An exhibit on Anchorman. Remember Anchorman, the movie? Right. And so why did we do that? Because it was fun. You need a little fun in a serious place, and also because there was a serious story. Any parody has a kernel of truth, right? And there was a time in the 70s when women were not making it into the anchor chair and Ron Burgundy's were ruling the world, right? And so we had a lot of fun with that exhibit, but we also educated people about a really important time in history. And so mix. Pop culture, reach them through pop culture when you can. You know, any way that you can, I think is important.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelly Chan, Globalization, Economics, and Business cohort. And I actually had the same exact question as the last one, but I do have a different one for you right now. So as leaders, as developing leaders, we have a voice, we're developing our voices, and to really grow and give each other feedback. When you are working with your staff, what are the most effective ways that you give constructive criticism to your staff, whether they're below or above you on the ladder?
I have a really short one. It's my favorite saying. I tell my daughters, the answer isn't ever no, but. It's yes, and. It's a way of, you've probably learned this in school from the time you were in grade school, the acknowledgement that that's a really, really good question. And now in my answer, I'm going to very subtly tell you a different way of doing it. No, it's all about language. It's what you said. You are amazing. That is a great idea. Let's talk about that and think about how we can make it better. While in the back of your mind, you might think that was the most ridiculous idea I ever heard. That's never going to work. And sometimes that happens, but I do think, I would just say a lot of it is language and communication and a really, really great appreciation for people's good ideas.
I would just like to add that a willingness to brainstorm with people above and below, I think it opens the door for constructive feedback on both sides, because it's got to be, it's got to come both ways. It can't be just the leader to someone else. It's got to be a give and take. So having openness to brainstorm.
It's going to sound corny, but it's true. Don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. I think if you think about it so that you're just not coming in and whining to your boss about stuff, and I even see my own daughters struggling with this in their workplaces, but if you can come in and think about, yeah, we got a problem, but I have a couple ideas, right? Maybe that's the and or. That's huge. Oh my God, I think for most of us, that really opens doors to conversations and solutions. Other things are just to use your voice. Again, I can't overestimate how important it is to boldly speak your mind.
In our setting, we're so codependent. I have one of everything, so one registrar, one collections manager. I do have 3 curators. That's the one thing I have. But just as we do advisory groups at the beginning of a project, to offer input into the things that we're working on. After every program, every exhibit, we have a debriefing. And it's sort of a self-assessment piece, and everybody talks about what worked, what didn't work, and it's not in a manner of pointing blame. It's just identifying things that could have been done better. And they do it to each other. I don't have to critique. I can sit in those meetings and not open my mouth, because they really look at it from, breaking it apart kind of thing.
Thank you.
Okay, hi, my name is Rachel. My question's for Jan. So at the Holocaust Museum in DC, I know that there was a lot of conflict with what to show, because they wanted to respect people who have been through it, but they also wanted to provide an accurate portrayal of the history of what happened. So I was wondering if there were any conflicts with the 9/11 Museum of what to show, and as you alluded to before, political conflicts that occurred. So could you just talk on that?
I'll be down to teach a semester's course on this, but I'll just go to one issue, which was, do you represent the perpetrators in the site of mass suffering? Especially when their victims' remains are there. And we had many of our key stakeholders, including, of course, family members and survivors, first responders who'd lost friends, but also law enforcement folks and FBI agents and what have you, who said, absolutely not. They have no role in this museum. To do so is to disrespect the sacredness of this site. And this is where we had to stick by, as museum professionals, however, and historians, we said, no, this, it was not a tsunami, it was not a hurricane. It was human agency, it was terrorism that created this event. And therefore, we need to hold human beings that did it accountable. It was all about the proportion of doing that. And we started out, I spent 4 years working with the Department of Justice down here to see if we could gather and present some of the evidence that was part of the Moussaoui trial and now is tied up with the Guantanamo tribunals. But in the end, we realized that it was just too soon to show physical things that actually, like Mohammed Atta's suitcase that failed to load onto Flight 11 and was found, and the last night letter was in it, and pepper spray, and all kinds of, incriminating evidence about what he was up to. Ultimately, we decided we would show photographs, and we would give a very terse presentation about how they came to the United States, when they came, the fact they were taking flight school lessons on how to take off, but not to land. But we had to make sure that the photographs were the photographs used by the FBI, so they were already dead, but they were presented as criminals, it was criminal evidence, and that the photographs were not larger than the photographs of the victims. So, this took 5 years to figure out. So, you have to just stick by your guns, but be open to listening and changing, modifying your position, which we had to. It was just too soon to present some of this charged material in this site.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Michaela Walker, and I'm in the Science, Health, and Medicine cohort, and I have 2 questions. My first question was directed to Jan. It was actually very similar to the last question, but it was about how, what are the visitors, I want to hear what the visitors and the tourist responses are to seeing some of the remains that you have on your museum, and have you gotten a good response, or is it more controversial as well with the tourists, not just the political side?
It was really interesting. We sold more newspapers in New York for 10, 11 years. We were in the Daily News, the New York Post. I'm not quite sure. Newspapers, those aren't necessarily the ones you want to be in every day, but we sold a lot because it was still an abstraction. What was this museum going to be? Did it have a political agenda? Was it going to be pro this, anti that? What? And fascinatingly, and thankfully, once it opened, I'd say 90% of that criticism dissipated. Then we had criticism because we had a museum store, and then it was like, you're selling cheese plates in the 9/11 museum. Of course, we weren't selling cheese plates, but it was like a commemorative platter. We had to get rid of it quickly. But honestly, right now the criticism is do you allow selfie sticks in the museum? I know Carrie has probably, we're all, right. And it's really about modifying visitor behavior. Most people conduct themselves with great dignity. They're very respectful and thoughtful. A few don't, but usually we don't have to do much about it. The visitors do that for us in a way.
Thank you. And my second question is directed to Kathy. Well, the museum is one of my favorite museums by far. I love it. And I wanted to know, do you help a lot when it comes to creating each exhibit? And by chance, what was your favorite exhibit that you've created over the years?
That's hard. Do I help? Yeah, my team puts together the exhibits. We do all original exhibits. Is that the question?
Yeah, I knew, I didn't want to sound stupid or anything, but
No. I just didn't understand your question.
You're the head, and then there's other people who work on separate special exhibits, and I wondered if you were one of those people who were specifically focused on one specific exhibit.
No, I get to be the person who gets to be involved with everything, which is really great. It's a lot of work, but so we don't have a big staff either, and we are doing now about 5 changing exhibits a year, which is ridiculous. Let me just tell you, it's a lot of work, but for our size of a facility. But yes, we do. What's my favorite exhibit? Okay, it's a toss-up. We did an exhibit on the 5th anniversary of the storm in New Orleans, Katrina, called Covering Katrina, because our own visitors told us over and over again they thought it was one of the most important stories in America that wasn't being covered and that we weren't highlighting enough in the museum. And so we went back and really took a strong look at all those important issues that came out of the coverage of the storm. And it was real, I mean, truly, it was a powerfully emotional exhibit. Last year, we did a big exhibit on the 50th anniversary of the death of John F. Kennedy. And because it was through the eyes of reporters that the world learned about that cataclysmic event. And again, that was a really emotional thing. But you know what? We realized most of you weren't alive when that happened, right? And so even though it resonated, I think, with your generation, we had, I know everybody here has done stickies, probably, sticky on the wall, talkbacks, but we did this thing where we said, where were you when you heard that JFK died? Because that was a big moment for my generation. And then we said, where were you, what was your JFK moment for your generation? You know, was it 9/11, Sandy Hook? You know, what was your big moment like that? And so, you know, those kinds of really emotional stories are what I think are the most important.
Thank you. If any of you have further questions, I suggest that you come and talk to us. There's going to be a reception just outside, right here, I believe. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to the panelists. And thank you, Sharon.
Oh, you're welcome. So, thank you, all of you. I've been to each and every one of these museums. And I'm not sure which is my favorite. My favorite is usually the one I'm in at the moment. And my favorite exhibit, gosh, I don't know. But my favorite evening, my favorite symposium for this year with the Women's Leadership Program is tonight. It has been a real treat to hear from all of you, your different perspectives, your different disciplines, your different viewpoints. And I just thank you for taking time out of your busy day or lives to come and join us. And in a token of that thanks, you get to take swag home. So we don't have memorial plates, but we do have a little bit of a token so that the next time you go to the grocery store, you'll think about the women's leadership.
Thank you
Susan,
so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you.